There is a moment most people never talk about, and it is not the moment you hit rock bottom. It is the one just before it. The moment you are standing at the edge of something and you still have a choice, and you do not take it. Because nobody ever taught you what Epictetus knew at age 7 while being held as a slave. Nobody ever showed you what Marcus Aurelius understood while running the most powerful empire in human history. Nobody ever handed you the one thing Seneca spent his entire life trying to give away for free. And here is what makes this strange. All three of them lived completely different lives. One was a slave who owned nothing. One was an emperor who owned everything. And one was a writer who moved between poverty and extraordinary wealth and back again. And yet, all three arrived at the same single conclusion. The same one. Not similar, not close, not adjacent. The exact same conclusion.
And that conclusion, if you actually sit with it, does not just change how you think. It changes what you do at 2 in the morning, when you are lying awake replaying a conversation that ended badly. It changes what you do when someone whose opinion you have been carrying for years finally says what you always suspected they thought. It changes what you do on the day everything you built quietly stops working, and you have to decide who you are without it. This is not a video about ancient philosophy. This is about 3 men who, between them, experienced every version of human suffering that exists and found a way through it that still works today. Because human nature has not changed. The problems that broke people 2,000 years ago are the same ones breaking people right now. They just have different names. Epictetus was born into slavery somewhere around 50 AD in what is now Western Turkey. He had no rights, no property, no freedom of movement, and at some point, his owner broke his leg. Deliberately, possibly to test a point. And Epictetus sat there while it was happening and said, calmly, "You are going to break it." And when it broke, he said, "Did I not tell you it was broken?" That is not a story about someone who stopped feeling pain. That is a story about someone who had found something inside himself that the pain could not reach. And that is what this video is actually about. Because whatever that thing is, Epictetus spent the rest of his free life, after he was eventually freed, trying to describe it. And the closest he ever got was this. Some things are in our control, and some things are not. 6 words that sound so obvious you almost miss them. Your opinion, your motivation, your desire, your choice. What you move toward and what you pull back from, these are yours. Nobody can take them. The weather cannot take them. The economy cannot take them. The person who left cannot take them. The job that disappeared cannot take them. Everything outside that circle, your reputation, what people say about you, whether things go according to plan, whether you get the result you worked for, whether people treat you the way you deserve to be treated, these are not yours. And you have been spending enormous amounts of yourself trying to control things that were never yours to control. Think about the last time something went wrong. Not a small thing, a real one. The first place your mind went was probably to everything outside that circle. The unfairness of it, the person who caused it, the circumstances that made it worse, the way it reflected on you, the outcome that was now uncertain. And the thing inside the circle, the only thing that was ever actually yours. What you were going to do next, how you were going to carry yourself through it, what this was going to make you rather than just do to you. That part got almost no attention at all. And that is the entire problem. Not the thing that went wrong, where your attention went when it did. Marcus Aurelius understood this in a way that is almost uncomfortable to read, because he was not writing for an audience. He was writing for himself, in a private journal that was never supposed to be published. And yet, 2,000 years later, people are reading it at 3 in the morning, because it sounds like someone who actually knew what it felt like to carry more than one person should have to carry. He was Emperor of Rome from 161 AD
to 180 AD.
And during that time, he dealt with a plague that killed millions, a war on the northern border that never fully ended, a co-emperor who undermined him, advisors who were not always loyal, and a son who turned out to be one of the worst emperors in Roman history. He sat with all of that, every single day, and every day he wrote. And what he kept coming back to, again and again, across hundreds of pages, was not strategy, not power, not legacy. It was this: you have power over your mind, not outside events, not people, not outcomes, not what happens next, just the mind. Just the one thing that sits behind all the other things and either holds or breaks, depending on what you feed it. And here is what that means practically. The argument you are still having in your head with someone who has already moved on, that is happening entirely inside your control. You are choosing to keep it running.
The anxiety you feel about something that has not happened yet, that is being generated by your mind, not by the future event. The future event does not exist yet. Your mind is creating the experience of it right now. The story you tell yourself about what the failure meant, about who you are, that is a story your mind is writing, and your mind can write a different one. Marcus Aurelius had every external reason to believe things were falling apart around him, and his response was to come back every single morning to the one thing that had not fallen apart. The choice about what to do with what was in front of him. Seneca's story is different, and honestly, more uncomfortable, because Seneca was not a slave and was not an emperor. He was a writer, a philosopher, and an advisor to Nero, which means he spent years trying to moderate one of the most dangerous rulers in Roman history from the inside, failing, knowing he was failing, and continuing anyway. And at the end of his life, Nero ordered him to die. Seneca's response to that has been studied and argued about for 2,000 years, because it was not what you would expect. He had spent decades writing about how to face death without flinching, about how a life well lived does not require more time, just more depth. And when the moment actually came, he appears to have lived exactly what he wrote, which is rare. Most people write one thing and do another. Seneca wrote it, and then he did it. And the thread running through everything he ever wrote, the single thing he kept returning to across his entire life, was something that sounds almost too simple until you actually try to do it. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Read that again, slowly. The thing you are afraid of right now, the thing that is sitting heavy in your chest at this exact moment, is almost certainly not happening. It is a projection. Your mind is generating it based on incomplete information, past experience and pattern recognition that is not always accurate. And you are living inside it as though it is already real, as though the worst version of how this could go has already happened, and you are just waiting for the physical world to catch up to the disaster your mind has already declared finished. And in the meantime, the actual moment, the one that is really happening right now, the one where something could still be done or changed or chosen differently, is getting no attention at all. Seneca spent his life trying to call people back from the invented catastrophe, back to the actual moment, back to what was real and available and still possible. 3 men, 3 completely different lives, 1 lesson. And the lesson is not what most people think it is. When people hear the word Stoicism, they imagine someone who does not feel things. That is not it at all. Epictetus felt the leg breaking. Marcus Aurelius felt the weight of everything he was carrying. Seneca felt afraid. They felt all of it. What they did with it was different. And that difference, broken down into something you can actually use, starting right now, that is exactly what comes next. There is a question that none of the 3 men ever asked out loud, but all 3 of them answered it with the way they lived. And the question is this: what do you actually control? Not what do you wish you controlled, not what feels like it should be yours to control, not what everyone around you seems to assume you are responsible for. What do you actually, genuinely, in the real world, have the final say over? Because most people have never sat down and honestly answered that question, and the cost of not answering it is enormous. It shows up in the exhaustion you feel at the end of a day where nothing technically went wrong. It shows up in the low, quiet dread that follows you into sleep and is already waiting when you wake up. It shows up in the way you can work harder than anyone around you and still feel like you are somehow losing. That feeling is not a character flaw. It is a navigation error. You have been trying to steer something using the wrong controls. Epictetus called it the dichotomy of control, and he was not gentle about it. He did not say it is helpful to think about what you can and cannot control. He said that every failure of peace, every moment of suffering that is not caused by physical reality, but by the mind wrestling with physical reality, comes from one single mistake: treating things outside your control as though they are inside it. That is the whole mistake. That is the one. And the reason it is so hard to stop making it is that the things outside your control are often the things that matter most to you. The relationship, the opportunity, the reputation, the outcome of something you have poured yourself into, the way a specific person sees you. These are not small things. You are not wrong to care about them, but caring about an outcome and believing you control it are two completely different things. And somewhere along the way, for most people, those two things got fused together, so that caring about something came to mean suffering over the parts of it that were never yours to determine. Think about the last time you spent a significant amount of mental energy on what someone thought of you, not what they said to you, what you imagined they thought. The version of their opinion that you constructed in your own head and then argued with, defended against, tried to influence before it was even expressed, worried about after it was expressed, replayed to see if it meant what you feared it meant. That entire process, from start to finish, took place inside your mind. Their actual opinion, whatever it was, sat quietly inside their mind, unchanged by any of your worry, unaffected by the mental energy you spent on it, completely indifferent to how much of yourself you gave to managing it. Epictetus would say, you were not suffering over their opinion, you were suffering over your imagination of their opinion, and your imagination is entirely within your control, which means the suffering was also, at every step, within your control. That is not blame. That is actually the most hopeful thing he ever said. Because if the suffering was being generated inside you, it can also be stopped inside you. You do not need the other person to change. You do not need the outcome to shift. You do not need the external situation to resolve itself before you are allowed to feel differently. The door was never locked from the outside. Marcus Aurelius came at the same truth from a different direction. He was not a philosopher by training, he was a ruler. And rulers deal constantly with the gap between what they decide and what actually happens. You issue an order, and the people executing it make mistakes. You build a plan, and reality does not cooperate with the plan. You invest years in something, and forces entirely outside your awareness dismantle it. He could have spent his reign furious. Many emperors did. Instead, he wrote something in his journal that reads almost like a reminder he had to give himself repeatedly, because the temptation to forget it was always there. You always have the option of having no opinion. Read that carefully. He is not saying you should be indifferent to everything. He is saying that the opinion, the judgment, the story you attach to an event, that part is always optional. The event happens, that part is not optional. But the meaning you assign to it, the emotional weight you load onto it, the narrative you build around it that determines how you carry it forward, that is always a choice. And he knew this was hard. He knew because he had to keep reminding himself. His journal is not the writing of someone who had mastered this and was passing it down. It is the writing of someone actively working at it, on bad days, under real pressure, with real things going wrong around him. And that is what makes it so honest. He was not pretending it was easy to stop assigning meaning to hard things. He was showing that it was worth doing the work anyway. Seneca, for his part, wrote something that most people read and agree with immediately, and then forget the moment anything goes wrong. He said that the wise man does not expose himself needlessly to danger, But he also knows that life sometimes places him in situations where danger cannot be avoided, and in those moments he does not ask for less difficulty, he asks for more capacity. Not an easier road, more strength for the road that exists. That distinction is small on the page and enormous in practice, because the version of relief most people spend their lives chasing is the version where the difficult thing stops being difficult, where the hard conversation resolves cleanly, where the uncertain outcome becomes certain, where the person who misunderstands you finally understands, where the situation rearranges itself into something more comfortable to stand inside. And Seneca is saying that is the wrong target. Not because relief is bad, but because it is not available on demand from the external world. The external world does not take requests. It does what it does on the timeline it chooses, with complete indifference to how ready you are. The only thing available on demand is what you bring to it, and what you bring to it is entirely within your control. Here is where all three of them converge on something that sounds almost too practical for philosophy. The practice, not the theory, not the idea, the actual daily practice of returning again and again to the question of what is yours and what is not. Because this is not something you understand once and then have. It is something you lose and find, and lose and find, sometimes within the same hour. Marcus Aurelius lost it regularly. That is why he kept writing the same things in different words, returning to the same anchors, rebuilding the same clarity that the chaos of actually living kept disturbing. Epictetus lost it too, almost certainly. Nobody who had their leg broken by their owner and managed to remain calm about it arrived at that calm on the first try. That is years of practice showing up in one moment. And Seneca lost it in the most visible way possible. He accumulated enormous wealth while writing about the irrelevance of wealth. He stayed close to a dangerous man while writing about the importance of integrity. He was not a saint. He was a person who knew what was right and sometimes could not do it. And he wrote about that too, with honesty. And somehow that honesty is what makes the philosophy real. Because it was not written by people who never struggled. It was written by people who struggled and kept returning to the practice anyway, who failed and came back, who lost the thread and picked it up again. And the one thing they all kept returning to, beneath every different angle, every different framing, every different version of the same essential idea, was this: you cannot choose what arrives. You can only choose what you do with it. That choice, the one about what to do with what arrives, is available to you right now. In whatever is sitting in your life at this moment that feels too heavy or too uncertain or too far outside what you can manage, the control you have been looking for was never out there. It has always been here. And learning how to actually use it in the specific situations that make it hardest to remember it exists, that is exactly where this goes next. There is a specific kind of tired that has nothing to do with how much sleep you got. You know the one. It is the tired that is already there when you wake up. The tired that follows you through a full day of doing everything right, hitting every mark, checking every box, and still arriving at the end of the day feeling like something essential was spent on something that did not deserve it. That kind of tired does not come from working too hard. It comes from carrying the wrong weight. And all three of these men, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca, identified the same source of that weight. Not circumstances, not difficulty, not the hardness of the road. The stories you tell yourself about all of it. Epictetus said something that his students apparently had to hear multiple times before it landed, because it sounds almost offensive the first time you hear it. He said that people are not disturbed by the things that happen to them. They are disturbed by their opinions about the things that happen to them. The first reaction most people have to that is resistance, because it sounds like he is minimizing real pain. It sounds like he is saying, just think differently and everything will be fine, which is the kind of advice that helps nobody and has been given by people who have never actually suffered. But that is not what he is saying. He was a man whose body had been broken by someone who legally owned him. He is not speaking from comfort. He is speaking from the specific authority of someone who had every reason to be destroyed by what happened to him and chose daily not to be. What he is actually saying is more precise than it first sounds. The event and the interpretation of the event are two separate things, and only one of them is yours. The leg breaking was not his choice. The meaning he assigned to it was. The identity he built around it was. The story about what it made him, what it said about his value, what it meant for the rest of his life, every single one of those things was a decision, made inside the only space nobody could ever take from him, his mind. And here is where this stops being ancient history and starts being your Tuesday. Think about something that happened to you that you are still carrying. Not the event itself, the story around the event. The version of it that you have told yourself so many times that the story and the event have become the same thing in your memory. The relationship that ended and the story that says something about that ending reflects a permanent truth about your worth. The opportunity that did not come through and the story that says that absence was a verdict on your capability. The person who left and the story that says their leaving is evidence of something fundamentally wrong with you that will keep producing the same result, no matter what you do. Those stories are not the events. Those stories are opinions, your opinions, about events that are finished. And Epictetus is saying, with complete seriousness, that you can change the opinion without changing the event. The event is closed. The opinion is still open. And the opinion is the thing that is actually costing you something right now, today, while the event itself sits quietly in the past where it cannot touch you. Marcus Aurelius would add something to this that is worth sitting with. He wrote that very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. Now, the word happy there is misleading in translation. He did not mean the feeling of happiness, the surface emotion, the good day. He meant something closer to settled, grounded, intact, the quality of a person who is not being moved around by every external shift, who has something stable at the center that the chaos at the edges cannot reach. And he is saying that thing, whatever it is, that settled, centered quality, is not built from the outside in. It is not assembled from good outcomes and favorable circumstances, and people treating you well and things going according to plan. It is built from the inside out, from the daily practice of choosing your interpretation before your reaction, of catching the story before it sets, of asking, before the weight of the event fully lands, whether the weight you are about to carry is the weight of what actually happened, or the weight of what you have decided it means. Those two weights are almost never the same size. The event is usually smaller, the story is usually crushing. Seneca wrote about this with a specificity that still feels startling. He wrote to a friend about grief, about the loss of people they had both known, and he did not do what most people do when writing about grief. He did not minimize it. He did not rush past it toward the lesson. He sat in it first. He wrote that grief is appropriate. Grief is human. The person who feels nothing when they lose someone they loved is not strong. They are simply absent from their own life. But then he drew a line. He said there is a difference between grief and what grief becomes when you refuse to let it move, when you build a permanent residence inside it, when you use it not to honor what was lost, but to avoid what is still present. When the mourning stops being about the person you lost and starts being about your own resistance to returning to a life that now has a different shape than you expected. That line is not always obvious when you are standing inside the grief, but it is there. And Seneca is saying that the Stoic practice, the actual useful part of everything these men spent their lives writing about, is learning to feel the real weight of real things fully, without adding the fictional weight of the story on top. Feel the loss.
Do not feel the story about what the loss means about the rest of your life. Feel the failure. Do not feel the story about what the failure reveals about your fundamental capacity. Feel the difficulty. Do not feel the story about whether the difficulty is proof that you were wrong to try. This is where the practice gets uncomfortable, because the stories are not always obvious. Sometimes they are so embedded in how you experience something that separating the event from the interpretation feels impossible, like trying to separate water from wet. And that is exactly where Epictetus would push back. He said the practice is not about achieving a permanent state of perfect clarity. It is about catching yourself mid-story, about noticing, sometimes only halfway through the spiral, that you have left the territory of what actually happened and entered the territory of what you are afraid it means. The noticing is the practice, not the perfection, the noticing. Marcus Aurelius caught himself mid-story regularly. You can see it in the journal. He would write something that reveals the weight he was carrying, the frustration, the exhaustion, the sense of being surrounded by people who were not equal to what the moment required. And then, sometimes within the same entry, he would pull himself back. He would write something like, "These people cannot hurt you. Only you can do that, by believing they have." He was not performing that for an audience. He was doing it for himself, in real time, as a man who was genuinely struggling with the same thing he was writing about. And that is the most important thing to understand about all three of these men. They were not born with this. They were not naturally immune to the weight of bad events. They were not philosophers who sat safely at a distance from real suffering and wrote theories about it. They were people who suffered, specifically and genuinely, and found, through practice and failure and return, that the story around the suffering was always heavier than the suffering itself. And every single time they found their way back to that truth, the weight shifted. Not because the circumstances changed. The circumstances often did not change at all, because the story did. And here is what that means for the thing you are carrying right now. Not in theory, right now. Whatever it is, there is an event, and there is a story around the event. And somewhere in the gap between those two things, there is a decision that has already been made, probably without you fully realizing you were making it, about what the event means, about what it says, about where it leaves you. That decision is not permanent. It was made inside your mind, which means it can be revisited inside your mind, and it can be made differently. Not by pretending the event did not happen, not by forcing a false positivity over the top of something real, but by honestly asking whether the story you are carrying is actually as true as it feels. Because feeling true and being true are not the same thing. Epictetus knew that. Marcus Aurelius knew that. Seneca knew that. And on the days when they forgot it, they wrote it down again, until it stuck. The weight you are carrying right now is made of two things: what happened and what you decided it means. One of those is fixed. The other one is still entirely yours. And the moment you separate them, really separate them, for even one clear second, something shifts. Not everything, not immediately, not perfectly, but something. And that something, small as it might feel in the moment, is exactly the opening that everything in the next part of this video is going to walk through. Nobody talks about the moment right after you understand something, not the understanding itself, the moment after it, because understanding something and actually living it are two completely different experiences. And the gap between them is where most people get stuck, where they have read the right books, watched the right videos, nodded at the right ideas, and then walked back into their actual lives and done exactly what they were doing before. Not because they are weak, not because the ideas were wrong, because understanding without practice is just information. And information alone does not change behavior. It changes what you know.
And what you know and what you do are, for most people, living in completely separate rooms that rarely visit each other. Epictetus was relentless about this. He had no patience for philosophy that stayed in the head. His students were not there to become better thinkers. They were there to become better at living. And the way he taught was not through elegant theory. It was through blunt, direct, sometimes uncomfortable confrontation with the gap between what his students said they believed and what their actual daily behavior revealed they believed. He once said, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things." That sounds like humility advice. It is not. It is practice advice.
What he is saying is that the moment you start actually living these ideas, not just nodding at them, but genuinely applying them, you will look strange to people around you. You will not react the way they expect you to react. You will let things go that they think should bother you. You will not chase things they think you should be chasing. You will make decisions that, from the outside, look like you have either given up or lost your mind. And the practice, the real practice, is being able to tolerate that appearance without rushing to explain yourself back into their comfort zone. Because the moment you start explaining, you have handed control back to the outside. Marcus Aurelius understood the practice differently because his life demanded a different version of it. He could not step away from responsibility. He could not retreat into philosophy as a private discipline while the empire ran itself. He had to practice in real time, under real pressure, in front of real people who were watching him and depending on him, and sometimes actively working against him. And his practice, the one you can see across hundreds of journal entries, was something he called returning to himself. Not escaping, not stepping back, returning. The idea was that no matter how far the noise of the day pulled him from his center, there was always a path back. Not a long path, not a difficult one, a single question asked honestly. What is actually required of me right now? Not what do I feel like doing, not what would make this easier, not what would make the people around me more comfortable. What is actually required? And then doing that thing, without the noise, without the story around it, without the weight of everything that was outside his control loading itself onto the one thing that was inside it. He wrote that when you wake up in the morning, you can think of it as a luxury, or you can think of it as a responsibility. Either the day is something that is happening to you, or it is something you are happening to. That framing, small as it sounds, changes everything about how the first hour of the day feels. Because the person who wakes up and thinks the day is happening to them is already in a defensive posture, already bracing, already organizing themselves around managing what arrives rather than directing what they do, already, before their feet hit the floor, operating from a position that has given the external world the first move. And the person who wakes up and understands they are happening to the day, that person is operating from a completely different starting point. Not arrogance, not the delusion that they can control everything, just the clear, grounded understanding that their choices are the first thing in motion. Before the circumstances weigh in, before the reactions arrive, before the noise starts, their choice is already moving. Seneca wrote about practice in a way that is more personal than almost anything else in Stoic literature. Because Seneca was honest about how badly he sometimes failed at it, he wrote to his friend Lucilius about the experience of being around people who pull you backward, about how even a well-practiced person can spend time in certain company and feel, afterward, that something has been subtly disturbed inside them, that the clarity they had that morning is slightly less clear by evening, that they are a little more irritable, a little more reactive, a little more caught up in things that should not have their attention. He did not pretend that practice made you immune to that. He said it makes you faster at noticing it, and faster at returning. That is the whole value of the practice, according to Seneca. Not that you stop being pulled,
Not that you become so internally stable that the world cannot reach you, but that the distance between being pulled and finding your way back gets shorter. That what once took you days to recover from takes hours. What took hours takes minutes. What took minutes takes a single breath and a single honest question. That progression is the proof that the practice is working, not the absence of being disturbed, the speed of the return. And here is where this becomes something you can actually use today, not someday, not once you have studied enough or understood enough or become the kind of person who has this figured out. Today, with whatever is currently making it difficult. The practice has 3 steps, and all 3 of them were used by these men in their actual lives, not as a formal system, as a way of surviving the specific difficulty of being human in a world that does not cooperate. The first step is the pause. Not a long pause, sometimes a single second. The moment between something arriving and you responding to it. That gap, small as it is everything. Because inside that gap is where every choice you actually have lives. Without the pause, you are not choosing, you are reacting. And reaction runs on old programming, on patterns formed before you had the perspective you have now, on habits built for versions of the world that may no longer exist. The pause is not weakness, it is the exact opposite. Epictetus called it the space between stimulus and response. He said that space was where freedom lived, because in that space you could ask the question that changed everything. Is this inside my control or outside it? That question does not take long to answer, but it has to be asked. And it cannot be asked if you never pause long enough to ask it. The second step is the honest answer. Not the answer you wish were true, not the answer that would make you feel less afraid, the honest one. Because the honest answer divides the weight immediately into 2 categories. The part that is yours to act on, and the part that is not yours at all, that belongs to circumstances, to other people, to outcomes that will go the way they go regardless of how much anxiety you pour onto them. And once you have that division, something practical becomes possible. You can act on your part, fully, without the drag of the part that is not yours weighing down the action. Marcus Aurelius called this doing what the moment requires. Not more, not less, just what is actually called for, applied with full attention, without the noise of everything outside the circle pulling at the edges of the thing inside it. The third step is the return, because you will lose this regularly. You will pause and forget to ask the question, or ask the question and not like the honest answer. Or get the honest answer and still feel the pull of the old pattern, the familiar weight of the story you have been carrying so long it feels like it belongs to you. And the return is not failure, the return is the practice. Every time Marcus Aurelius wrote the same idea in a new way in his journal, he was returning. Every time Epictetus told his students the same thing again from a slightly different angle, he was returning. Every time Seneca wrote to Lucilius about something he already understood but needed to say out loud again, he was returning. The return is not evidence that you have not learned. It is evidence that you are human and that the practice is ongoing, and that ongoing is exactly what it is supposed to be. There is no arrival point where this becomes permanent and effortless. There is only the practice, getting more familiar, the return getting faster, the pause getting more natural, the question getting easier to ask and easier to answer honestly. And slowly, across days and then weeks and then months of this, something that is very hard to describe but very easy to feel begins to build. Not confidence exactly, not peace exactly, something that sits underneath both of those things, a quality of being less surprised by difficulty, less destabilized by what you cannot control, less dependent on favorable circumstances to feel like yourself. Epictetus had it while being owned by someone else. Marcus Aurelius had it while running an empire that was slowly falling apart at the edges. Seneca had it, imperfectly and inconsistently, but enough to face the end of his life with something that looked, to everyone watching, like a form of grace. And none of them had it because life went well. They had it because they practiced when life did not. And that practice, the specific, daily, ordinary, unremarkable practice of pausing, answering honestly, and returning when they lost it, is available to you right now in the exact life you are currently living, with the exact difficulty that is currently in front of you. Not the life where things have settled, not the version where you have more time or more resources or more clarity about where things are headed. This one, right now. The pause is available right now. The question is available right now. The honest answer, however uncomfortable, is available right now. And what happens when you start using them? When you really start? Not just nodding at the idea, but actually pausing and actually asking and actually answering honestly. That is where this has been heading the entire time. And that is exactly where the final part of this goes. Everything this video has covered so far has been building toward one thing. Not a conclusion, not a summary, not a neat ending that wraps the ideas up and sends you back to your life unchanged. One question. And the question is not philosophical. It is not abstract. It is not something you think about and file away for later. It is something you answer right now, with your actual life, in the actual situation you are currently standing inside. Here it is. What would change tomorrow morning if you actually lived this? Not if you understood it better, not if you read more about it, not if you came back to this video and watched it again, if you lived it. Tomorrow, in the specific moments that will arrive specifically for you, with the specific difficulty that your specific life is currently asking you to deal with. Because that is the only place any of this becomes real. Epictetus did not teach his students in a library. He taught them in a room, in real time, by asking them questions about their actual lives and then refusing to accept the answers that sounded wise but meant nothing. He pushed until the philosophy left the page and entered the room, until it stopped being something they knew and started being something they did. And the first thing that changes when you actually live this, rather than simply understand it, is so quiet that most people miss it entirely. The morning feels different. Not dramatically different, not transformed, just slightly less braced, slightly less organized around managing what might go wrong, slightly more oriented toward what you are actually going to do, rather than what might be done to you. That shift is small, and it is everything. Because the posture you carry into the first hour of the day determines the posture you carry through all the hours that follow. And the person who begins the day already in a defensive crouch, already anticipating the worst version of what is coming, already spending mental energy on circumstances that have not arrived yet, that person arrives at every moment of the day already partially depleted, before anything has actually happened. Marcus Aurelius wrote about the morning specifically. He wrote that when you find it difficult to get out of bed, you should remind yourself that you are getting up to do the work of a human being, that the work is not optional and the resistance to it is not meaningful, and the body's preference for warmth and stillness is simply the body being the body, not a signal about whether the day is worth getting up for. He wrote that for himself, on mornings when he did not want to get up either. And the reason that matters is because it is easy to imagine that a man with his level of philosophical understanding woke up every morning feeling ready, feeling clear, feeling like everything he had written the night before was fully integrated and fully available. He did not. He woke up the same way most people do, with resistance, with the weight of what was waiting, with the pull towards staying exactly where he was rather than going out to meet what the day required. And he got up anyway, not because he felt like it, because he had decided in advance that feeling like it was not the requirement. Doing it was. That decision, made once and then returned to every morning, is not a small thing. It is the difference between a life that is directed and a life that is reactive, between a person who is happening to their days and a person their days are happening to. Seneca wrote something in his final years that reads differently once you know how his life ended. He wrote that the whole future lies in uncertainty. Live immediately. He was not talking about impulsiveness. He was not talking about ignoring consequences or throwing away planning or pretending tomorrow does not exist. He was talking about the specific theft that worry commits against the present moment. The future is uncertain. It has always been uncertain. It will always be uncertain. And the mind's attempt to make it certain, to run every possible scenario, to prepare for every possible outcome, to pre-suffer every possible difficulty, does not make it less uncertain. It just makes the present moment less inhabitable. You cannot live fully in a moment you are mentally absent from. And most people are mentally absent from most of their moments. They are in the past, replaying what should have gone differently. Or they are in a future that does not exist yet, managing a version of events their mind invented. And the actual moment, the one that is real, the one where their life is actually happening, gets the leftover attention. The fraction of presence that remains after the past and the imaginary future have taken their share. Seneca is saying that is the wrong distribution. The present moment is not where you wait while more important things happen somewhere else. It is where everything actually happens. Every relationship exists in present moments. Every piece of work is built from present moments. Every experience of being alive is a present moment, or it is nothing. And the practice, the one all three of these men kept returning to across their entire lives, is nothing more complicated than learning to be in the moment you are actually in, which sounds so simple that it almost sounds insulting, and is so difficult that most people never fully manage it, even once in an entire day. Because the mind resists it. The mind was built for pattern recognition and future planning and past analysis and threat detection, and all of those functions pull it away from the present and into somewhere else. The mind, left to its own devices, is almost never where the body is. The practice is bringing it back, again and again and again, without frustration at having to bring it back again, because the frustration is just another thing pulling you out of the moment, another story, another weight that has nothing to do with what is actually in front of you. Now here is the thing that Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Seneca all understood, and that does not get said enough in conversations about Stoicism. This is not about becoming someone who cares less. It is about becoming someone who cares accurately. The undisciplined mind cares about everything with roughly equal intensity. The offhand comment someone made 3 years ago and the genuine crisis happening right now receive almost the same amount of emotional weight. The thing that cannot be changed and the thing that absolutely can are both consuming the same energy. The imaginary future problem and the real present opportunity are competing for the same attention. And nothing gets what it actually deserves, because everything is getting approximately the same thing, regardless of what it deserves. The Stoic practice, the real one, beneath all the philosophy and the quotes and the ancient history, is calibration. Learning to give real things real weight, and learning to give invented things, past things, unchangeable things, other people's things, the weight they actually deserve, which is much less, which is sometimes nothing at all. Epictetus gave the broken leg exactly what it deserved. Pain, yes. Response to the physical reality of it, yes. But not a story about what it meant. Not an identity built around being the person to whom that was done. Not a permanent weight carried forward into every moment that followed. Just the thing itself. No extra charge. Marcus Aurelius gave the plague and the war and the disloyal advisors and the failing son exactly what they deserved. His full attention when action was required. His best judgment applied to what was actually within his power. And then, when he had done what could be done, he let the rest be what it was. Not with indifference, with accuracy. Seneca gave his fear of death exactly what it deserved. He felt it. He wrote about it honestly. He did not pretend it was not there. And then he returned, as he always returned, to the question of what the fear was actually made of. Imagination. Uncertainty. A story about an event that had not yet arrived. And he placed that, accurately, in the category of things that were outside his control, and therefore not worth the weight he had been giving them. And when the event arrived, he met it with what he had built across a lifetime of that practice. Not perfect peace, not the absence of feeling, just the steady, practiced, imperfect but genuine ability to be present for whatever was actually happening, without the added weight of everything that was not. That is what these three men, across three completely different lives, across centuries of human history, kept arriving at from every direction. Be here, accurately, with what is actually yours. Let the rest be what it is. And in the space that opens up when you stop carrying what was never yours to carry, something becomes possible that was not possible before. Not happiness as a feeling, not a life without difficulty. A life that is actually yours, built from your actual choices, directed by your actual values, measured against your own honest assessment of what you are here to do, rather than against the noise of what everyone else seems to think you should be doing. That life does not require perfect circumstances. It does not require things to go well. It does not require the people around you to finally understand, or the outcomes to finally cooperate, or the timing to finally feel right. It requires the morning practice, the pause, the honest question, the return when you lose it. It requires, in the specific moment that is hardest, the decision to bring your attention back to what is actually yours and let go, with as much grace as you can manage, of everything that is not. Epictetus did it in chains. Marcus Aurelius did it on a throne that was never as secure as it looked. Seneca did it, knowing the person he was trying to serve might one day order his death, and then doing it anyway, right up until that day arrived. Three men, three lives that had almost nothing in common, one practice that ran through all of them like a thread, and that thread is available to you right now. Not when things settle, not when you feel ready, not when the circumstances finally arrange themselves into something more manageable. Now, in this moment, which is the only one you actually have. If something in this video shifted something in you, even slightly, do something with that shift before it fades. Share this with someone who is carrying more than they should be. Someone who has been fighting the wrong battle for too long. Someone who needs to hear that the weight they cannot put down might not be theirs to carry at all. Leave a comment below with the one thing from this video you are going to actually use tomorrow morning. Not the one that sounds most impressive, the one that is most true for where you are right now. And if you want more of this, the kind of content that does not just tell you what the Stoics said, but actually tries to hand you something you can use, then Stoic origin is where that lives. Every video here is built for the person who is done nodding at good ideas and ready to actually live them. Subscribe and come back tomorrow, because this practice, like all real practices, is not a one-time event. It is a return, and the return is always available.